Hello again, welcome to and welcome back to my page. In today's video, we're going to get into one of my favorite Paphiopedilums. The name of this Paph that you see on your screen, I might butcher this name. It could be one of two things. It's either leucochilum or Godefroy. Now, this is a species Paph, which means that there's nothing in the background to breed this flower. This is how it stands on its own as a species on its own. The plant is endemic to places such as Vietnam, Malaysia, the peninsula portion of Thailand, and one of the most important features of this plant is that it is terrestrial. And what a terrestrial orchid means is that it grows in the ground. Now, this orchid doesn't necessarily grow in the ground, but it grows on the ground. So it may be semi-terrestrial, if you will. Most of the orchids that we know, such as the Phalaenopsis, is epiphytic, and they're known to grow on trees and on things. Not that they're a parasite to them or anything, but it's just the nature that they grow. As opposed to many Paphiopedilums, some may be epiphytic, but most Paphiopedilums are either terrestrial or what we call lithophytic, which means that they grow on rocks and in the crevices of rocks. Either way, they grow on the ground. And an interesting thing about this Paph, leucochilum, and many other Paphs is that because they go on the ground, a lot of them are very close to sea level. This one in particular grows at sea level, I think maybe only 100 meters high, which is very low for an orchid. And because of that, you get to take care of it like a houseplant. And as you can see, the leaves are gorgeous on this plant, whether you have a bloom or not. And again, with it being at sea level, it grows a bit more used to a water retentive media. So to get into the personal care, I do think that I grow this Paph and many of my Paphiopedilums like houseplants, but they're orchids. So I don't grow them in soil, but something that's very water retentive. So this plant, for example, happens to grow in a mix of very small bark and moss because the mixture is very retentive. The pot has no holes on the side, just holes on the bottom for drainage, as most plants or all plants should have. And I don't like to put holes in the pots that many of my Paphs are in, depending on the pot size. So this happens to be a small pot. It's going to dry rather fast because it doesn't have as much material in it as other pots. So it doesn't require holes in the side. Unlike many of my other Paphs that I grow in taller plastic cups, which I do have a few holes, no more than 4, and good drainage at the bottom. And the 4 holes are normally around the sides of that plastic cup. Now, with regard to the light, these plants are known to be hot, summer bloomers, summer growers, so they can withstand a pretty high amount of light. On the contrary, they can also tolerate, not withstand or thrive, but they can tolerate a low amount of light as well. But I like to have blooms, so I don't really grow any of my collection in too little light. As you can see, even in the background here, I have my plants that are out of my grow space sitting on my kitchen counter, and I have grow lights under my cabinets that those plants happily sit under. Now, on the topic of the blooms and the fact that I do also want to mention this plant blooms in the summer, I would say. This plant actually bloomed for me in the summer of 2022 for the first time. In 2 years, it has not bloomed for me since I got it in 2020. It was one of the first Paphs I actually purchased, but this year it bloomed in the back of a U-Haul truck. And during my move, I did leave DC with the plant in bud, and by time I arrived to Vegas, it was open, and I decided to put it in my bathroom because at the time, bathroom was the place I frequented the most, and I would spend time there. There's a big mirror, the shower is very nice, and yes, so while relocating, this baby bloomed just that one time for me, and I'm hoping, as you can see in the photo, that it'll give me another bloom sometime in the near future. Probably not this year, given that the size of this new growth is not near the size of the previous one, and the previous one took almost 2 years to bloom after even getting that size after a year. So I'll keep you updated on that. Now, again, I do take care of my paphs and really all of my plants the same way. I just meticulously decide how I'm going to plant and what I'm going to plant them / pot them into, and that kind of determines when to water. So I have everyone down to basically a schedule of you get watered 1 week or you get watered every 2 weeks, and all of my paphs get watered every 7 days, every week. Now, with regard to light, I don't spend too much time on requirements because my collection has always been under grow lights. I did mention in my first video about relocating here that I did test everything in the northern window and it didn't work. It wasn't fast enough for me if it was working, and that's all I'm gonna say about that. Now let's jump into some hybrids, because one thing I did notice while I was filming this video is that my leucochilum hybrids have all bloomed. Or godefroy, whatever plant this is. And one of the reasons why I keep mentioning leucochilum or godefroy is because before I got into the orchid hobby, I like to use the term back in the day, but it wasn't that long ago. Leucochilum was considered godefroy. It was a variation of it, and I believe it has to do with the pouch not having any spots, as opposed to the godefroy, which looks exactly like this flower and very close to this plant, but the godefroy has spots on the pouch. And this argument, I don't know, it just goes on for forever, I suppose. But two of the hybrids I have, which is the reason why I segued into that, are basically the same parents in the background regarding leucochilum and godefroy and what they're crossed with, which is the Delenatii, but we'll get into that in a second. But first, I'm going to start with a plant that doesn't have to do with either of those two, and it's QF Winona, which has bloomed for me 3 times. Very vigorous plant. It's leucochilum, again, crossed with Nivium, which is an all-white paph. They're all in the same family, so they look very similar, but Nivium basically looks like an album or an all-white version of the leucochilum. And again, it's called QF Winona, and these are space-saving plants. They're so tiny. I definitely recommend them. One of the reasons I got into paphs is because many of them have these smaller sizes, and you can just collect a range of all their features and different kinds of leaves and modeling and blooms. And I personally don't spike the blooms on these plants. I do like to let them hang pendant off the shelves or in the shelves, how you will. Let's move along to two of the hybrids that I was just talking about. So the first one is called Paph Catherine Brio. I hope I'm saying that right. And it's a cross of leucochilum by Delenatii, but it's technically godefroy variation leucochilum by Delenatii, because when this plant was made, that's what the cross was called. And another plant that has bloomed for me has a very, very nice bloom, and I'll go ahead and show the blooms just as I've shown the Winona of these plants. What you're seeing now is very current. I just filmed these videos on November 1st, so all of this is very current. And jumping into the next Paph is QF. There's that QF again, not sure what it means, but it has to do with the nursery. So this is QF Acala Lalo, and it's Delnatii by leucochilum. By the time leucochilum was already its own species. So technically they're the same plants, but they just have different names because of the generational differences of the names being registered at different times when the plants were considered different variations at different times. But now leucochilum is a species that stands on its own, and it's definitely a plant or an orchid that I recommend purchasing even if you want to jump into orchids. I know that everyone says that the Phalaenopsis, aka the fowl, the most popular orchid, the moth orchid that you see in the department stores and basically everywhere during holiday time, is very easy, but these are easier to me and they like to be moist. So if you do have a heavier hand in watering, I'm not saying to overwater, but if you do have a heavier hand in watering, these Paphs, especially ones like the leucochilum that are a bit more terrestrial living and lower elevation located in nature, they're just a bit more easier and forgiving. And just to mention the fact about overwatering, I'm an underwaterer. Again, I water my plants once a week and I still have low humidity with my humidifiers. And not that I try to put everything on the schedule, it's just that I try to put everything on the schedule. But I do pot the plants in different pot textures and sizes depending on how fast I need that to dry out along with the medium that it's potted in. So in true the right Paph fashion, I'm gonna go ahead and put my Instagram handle up there, which is also my Facebook, and of course my YouTube name, The Right Paph, a spin on my favorite orchids, one that you're seeing here on your screen. And thank you again for tuning in to my videos. I believe the next video I'm gonna do is gonna be on a fowl, but it may be on a Paph because those are the ones that are blooming for me aside from one of the fowls that is at my job right now. But I'll leave you all with that. Have a wonderful day and thank you again for tuning in. Bye.